So over the last few years, I've noticed something kind of crazy happening here in Fort Worth. It feels like every week I'm talking to somebody from California. Some have already decided that they're moving, and others are flying in for the weekend to see if Fort Worth is really what everyone says that it is. And then there are some people that are sitting in front of the computer late at night on Zillow with a dozen browser tabs open. And the conversation that keeps coming up is a matter of how many times they try to put it off is Fort Worth really the right move to make? Now, if we haven't met before, my name is Devin with the Fort Worth Blueprint. Now, I live here in Fort Worth today, but a few years ago, I relocated my family from Kansas City here to Texas. So when I talk to people trying to figure out whether leaving California is the right move, I understand what they're going through in their head because this isn't really about a house. If it were, then the decision would honestly be super easy. Now, the hard part is everything attached to the place that you're leaving behind. The coffee shop where they already know your order, the restaurant that you've been going to for years, the friend that you text when you want to grab a dinner on a random Tuesday night, the route home that you take that you've driven so many times from work that you just don't even think about it anymore. Those are the things that don't show up on Google searches, but they're often the hardest things to leave behind. And that's why I think that people sometimes misunderstand this decision. Most of the people that I talk to aren't leaving a place that they hate. They actually really love it. They're trying to decide whether the life that they could build somewhere else is actually worth leaving behind the life that they already feel is super familiar and that they're comfortable with. Because a lot of people, the numbers matter too. But, maybe they've watched neighbors leave over the last few years. Maybe they've looked at what homes cost in the area where they live and they wondered if they'll get the same amount of space that they've been hoping for. And maybe they started asking themselves whether the life that they imagined 10 years ago feels harder to reach than what they expected. That's when the emotional side of the decision starts colliding with the practical side. That's what makes this so difficult. You can picture what you're hoping to gain, friends gathered in the backyard on a Saturday evening while somebody stands next to the grill claiming that they're not burning the burgers or something, or family coming to visit and having a place of their own instead of having to go out and get a hotel or stay in your living room, or even opening your monthly bank statement and feeling a little bit of relief and wondering if there's a surprise at the end of the month. Those possibilities are easy to imagine. The harder part is measuring what you're leaving behind. How do you compare a familiar life to a possible one? How do you weigh 10 years of memories against something that hasn't happened yet? And how do you know if the trade is worth it? That's why these conversations tend to last months, not because people can't make a decision, but because they're trying to make the right one. They don't want to make a mistake. They're afraid of making a mistake. And honestly, I think that's the real question sitting underneath all of this. It's not, can we afford to move? Because about 90% of the people can't afford to make a move, but it's, will the life that I'm building be worth what I'm leaving behind here? Usually that's when the research starts. A friend or a coworker decides to relocate after talking about it and going through the motions. Somebody in your family keeps talking about Texas. At first, it's just background noise, right? Then one night, you're sitting in front of the computer and a photo catches your attention. Nothing special, just a backyard barbecue that you've seen a million times. Kids running through the grass, people standing around a fire pit just really enjoying themselves. A few folding chairs scattered around the patio. The kind of picture that you would have ignored a few years earlier. But this time you actually stop, you think about it, and you wonder what that would be like to be you. You look a little bit closer and you really notice that backyard, then the house, and somewhere in the middle, all of that, and a question starts to creep into your head of how are they affording all this when they didn't have anything close to that when they lived here in California. Now, that's the conversation that usually changes everything, because now you're not just curious about Texas. You're curious about exactly what the possibilities are, what the limits could be. And before long, you've got browser tabs open comparing cities that you've never visited, reading articles, looking at homes, and somehow you found yourself 3 hours deep into relocation videos on YouTube. Not because you've decided to move, but because you're trying to figure out if moving is even possible. And somewhere during that research, Fort Worth starts to pop up and you're starting to get pretty curious. Maybe it's in a video, maybe it's in an article, maybe it's a conversation with somebody who already made the move. Either way, the city keeps finding its way onto your screen, and the possibilities start popping into your head, not because you were searching for Fort Worth, but because you're searching for a different version of your life. And it lets you say that you decide to do it. The boxes get packed, right? The moving truck gets loaded. A few emotional goodbyes happen in the driveway. The one day you wake up in Texas, and at first everything feels a bit, it just feels different, right? Not in a bad way. It's just different, and that you made the right decision. But that doesn't mean the adjustment period just happens overnight, because it doesn't. I can tell you from personal experience, it takes a while. But back in California, life had a rhythm for you. You knew where to meet your friends for dinner. You knew which roads to take when traffic got too heavy. You knew the places that felt familiar because you'd spent years building a life there. Then suddenly you don't know any of that anymore. And for a while, that feels strange. Not because anything is wrong, but because you're living in a place that hasn't become a part of your story yet. And the restaurant will eventually become your favorite place and not just another restaurant. The shortcut you'll someday take without even thinking about it is still just a road that you haven't discovered yet. The places that will eventually feel familiar are places that you haven't built memories at yet, and that you made the right decision, and you still miss the comfort of knowing your city. But little by little, that starts to change, right? A few weeks go by, and then a few months go by. You find that coffee shop that you keep coming back to. You discover that restaurant that immediately it's where you want to take friends whenever they come from California to visit you. You stumble onto a faster route home, and you wonder how you didn't find it sooner. And one day you catch yourself giving directions to somebody else. Now, that's usually when it really all starts to hit you. You're not trying to figure out the city anymore. You're actually living in it. You're breathing in it. It's your day to day. And once people get past the question of whether they should move, another question usually takes its place. And that's, if we do this, what do we actually want our life to look like? Because once the boxes are unpacked and Fort Worth really starts to feel familiar for you, that's the question that kind of sticks around. And the interesting thing is that Fort Worth doesn't really hand you just one answer. It actually gives you options. Now, one thing that I've noticed and that I've actually lived is people relocating, especially from California, is that many of them aren't looking for a completely different lifestyle. They're looking for a little more breathing room, a little more space, a little more flexibility in how they live their day-to-day life. And that's where the conversation usually starts to get a little more specific. So take somewhere like Aledo, Texas, for example. The first time somebody drives out there, they're usually paying attention to the houses, which is completely understandable. A lot of people moving from California are seeing more space than what they're actually used to seeing. But if you spend enough time out there, something really starts to stand out, especially right now in 2026. Aledo feels like a place that's growing in really real time. You drive down a road that you haven't been to, and suddenly there's a neighborhood taking shape where there used to be open land. A field that sat empty not that long ago now has construction equipment parked on it. The area that really feels like it's stretching outward. You can see things happening. Then you pull into one of the ballparks on a Saturday morning. Before you even put your car in park, a kid jumps out of the back seat with a glove in his hand and takes off towards the field. His dad's right behind him carrying a folding chair and a cup of coffee and a baseball bag that's somehow sliding off his shoulder. And the game doesn't start for another 20 minutes. So that doesn't seem to matter. Kids are already throwing the balls around. Parents are finding spots along the fence line. A coach is trying to wrangle up his kids and get their attention and get them ready for the game. That's what Aledo is. That's what Aledo feels like. It's a family culture that the city is really growing. And a lot of people from California are really looking for that. They're not just looking for the neighborhood that just opened, or the road got extended, or there's a new development coming, which is all great. They're looking for that family focus, that slow down, and that convenience that a lot of people really flock to the area for. And for some people, that's when the picture really starts to come into focus. Maybe you're standing there watching it all and realizing that you can really see yourself there. And that's where a lot of people who aren't really too dramatically looking for a change, that's what you find. They're not trying to reinvent their lifestyle. They're trying to keep many of the things that they already enjoy and find places that feel just a little bit easier. So speaking of, that's kind of where Southlake comes into the conversation. The first few times I spent time there really trying to figure it out, I understand why it catches people's attention. The homes are impressive. The shopping is upscale. The restaurants are the kind of place that people actually like to spend their time at. You notice things right away. What really took me a little bit longer to notice was the pace. People in Southlake, they don't seem to be in a rush from one thing to the next. A couple would, finish their lunch at a table and they would just kind of hang out for a little bit after they paid their bill. Someone would stop halfway across town square because they ran into a friend that they weren't expecting to see. And a quick trip somehow turned into a whole entire afternoon. And if you're coming from California, that might be exactly what catches your attention. Not necessarily a completely different life, a lifestyle that really feels familiar, just with a little more breathing room and a little less friction and a little more space to really enjoy the things that a lot of us really value. But maybe neither of those feels quite right. One thing I've noticed about a lot of people relocating from California is that some get really excited by what the place is today, which is great. Fort Worth has come a long way. And others really get excited by what it could become, which it's growing and there's a lot of developments here. And that's what really makes an area like Walsh interesting. Two people can drive through the exact same neighborhood and walk away with completely different impressions. One person sees construction, the other person sees possibilities. And what's interesting is that neither person is wrong. Walsh feels like a place that's still being written. You can drive through one afternoon and watch, crews working on a new section of homes and then come back a few months later and families are walking down those same sidewalks. The story changes out there extremely quick. And if you're the kind of person who gets excited about what's coming next, then that's part of the appeal. They like the idea of getting in early, of watching a community take shape around them instead of moving into a place where it feels like everything's already settled. Then there are people who don't get excited about what might happen someday. They get excited about momentum. And if that's you, then the Alliance Corridor is probably worth paying attention to. Every time I drive through the area, which is the area that I live in, I feel like I've missed a chapter or I missed a meeting somewhere where something new was getting built. A building that was nothing but steel beams, the last time I drove by, suddenly has cars all through the parking lot. A piece of the land that barely caught my attention a few years ago is now, businesses, restaurants, and has people moving through it all day long. And the area seems to move faster than your memory of it. You can recognize places because of what used to be there. Then one day day you drive past and realize that they've become something entirely different. And after a while, you stop trying to really keep track of every new development. You just accept that the area is moving forward. Now, if you're energized by the growth and change, then you'll probably feel it almost immediately. Some people want established, others want to be close to what's next. They like feeling that energy. They like seeing the change happening around them. And whether that feels right for you or not, you can see the moment that you drive through the area. Nobody has to really explain it to you. You notice it when you're driving around. And that's one of the things that really surprised me most about moving here to Fort Worth is the last few times somebody visits Fort Worth, they're usually trying to figure out what kind of city it is. And then they realize that that's really the wrong question to ask. One Saturday, you might find yourself in the stockyards watching the cattle drive make its way down the street. And a few hours later, you're sitting on the patio in Clear Fork having lunch. Then on the drive home, you're passing through Alliance, wondering where half these new buildings even came from. And at some point, it just really starts to click for you. None of these experiences feel the same, and yet somehow they all belong to the same city, which is extremely interesting. And I think that's what makes Fort Worth so appealing to different kinds of people. The family spending their Saturday morning at the ballpark, or the couple lingering around Southlake after lunch, the person who gets excited about their growing community, or the person who wants to be surrounded by all the momentum that's happening in different areas. They're all looking for something a little bit different. And somehow they all manage to find it in the same place for themselves right here in Fort Worth, Texas. So if you're sitting in front of the computer right now wondering whether you're crazy for even considering a move like this, I tell you the same thing that I told myself, I told my wife, and I tell people who call me every single week. Just slow down. You don't have to figure everything out right now tonight. The house can wait. The neighborhood can wait. The question that I'd spend more time thinking about is a much simpler one, is what kind of life are you actually trying to build if you were to leave California today? Because once you get what kind of life are you trying to build if you actually left California today? Because once you get clear on that, then a lot of the other decisions start to get a whole lot easier. And the reason that I say that is because every place that we've talked about in this video offers a different answer. Maybe you watch a Saturday morning at the ballpark in Aledo and immediately understand the appeal. Maybe you spend that afternoon in Southlake and you're driving around and you just see the luxury. Or maybe you're the kind of person that drives around Walsh and you get excited about the new community that's coming up. And you go through Alliance and you're seeing that new town center or that new cigar bar, and it gets you excited. None of those answers are wrong. They're just different. And that's what I think Fort Worth has ended up on so many people's, they're just different. And that's why I think Fort Worth has ended up on so many people's radar, especially coming from California these last few years. It's not because everybody wants the same thing, because honestly, they don't. They're looking for different things. They're just finding it in the same exact place. So if you're still in that research phase, please, I beg you, keep researching. If you're planning a visit, then come spend some time here. Drive around, get out of the car. Don't just get stuck looking at Zillow and going down the rabbit hole of watching YouTube videos, which YouTube videos are great. Relocation videos are awesome, but you really need to see it for yourself and get a feel for it, because once you do that, then you'll really know which area is for you. Just really pay attention, just slow down and just try to figure it out, because eventually there comes a point where spreadsheets just stop helping, right? The rankings stop helping. The online opinions are no longer useful. And the only question left is whether you can picture your life there. Because if you can, then you're probably closer to your answer than you think. And honestly, that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned from talking to so many people and doing this move myself, is that very few people call me years later and tell me that they regret the move because the house wasn't perfect or their property tax bill was super low, right? What they remember is the life that they built once they actually got here, the friends that they've met, the routines they created, and the places that slowly become familiar, the moments that made Fort Worth really feel like home. And the funny thing is that by the time most people get to that stage, they're not really debating California versus Texas anymore. They're trying to decide which version of their future really feels right for themselves or for their family. So don't get so focused on the square footage, the interest rate, and the property taxes that you'll forget about what you're actually deciding. You're not choosing a house, you're choosing a future. You're choosing where your memories are going to be made at next, and you're just really choosing that next backdrop to the chapter of your life. And whether that chapter ends up being written in Fort Worth or Dallas or Austin, I think the goal should remain the same: is build a life that feels right for you, not a life that somebody else tells you that you want or that you see that they have. The life that fits the people sitting around your dinner table, because at the end of the day, nobody's choosing between good or bad. They're choosing between two different versions of what they might call the good life. And once you're clear on which version that you're actually looking for, the decision tends to become a whole lot easier. And if you're trying to figure that out and you need somebody to help make sense of the area, reach out anytime. That's exactly why I created the Fort Worth Blueprint. My team and I would be more than happy to help you. So guys, be sure to like and subscribe if you find these videos helpful, and we'll see you on the next one.